Okay. Well, it's a pleasure to be invited to this conference. Thank you for doing so. I've been using MediaWiki in various projects. It's great for publishing information in slightly more advanced settings than the basic HTML pages that I started writing in about 1993. Most of you out there probably weren't even born at that point. So things have changed a bit. So I'm going to look a little bit back, both on the web and in particular CSS, look at some of the development, some of the things we did, some of the things we did right, and maybe some of the things we did wrong. And then also try to see where we are now and perhaps look a little bit into the future. It's not going to be very structured. I'm going to jump a little bit between society, between technology, between history, past and future, but hang in there. There is a thread in there. Now I'm going to try and share my presentation with you, which will happen if I do this right. Can you see that now? Can anyone see my name on the screen? Yeah. Brian, yep. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, you're good. Can you hear me?
I'm good. I'm good. Okay, great, super. So my name is Håkon Wium Lie. I'm a native of Norway, but my story starts in another small country in Europe, in Switzerland. This is a picture from CERN, the physics laboratory, which most of you probably know about. This is also where the web happened to be developed. It wasn't totally an accident, but it's not obvious that the web would be developed here, because the main purpose of CERN is to find even smaller things, you know, the subatomic particles, and the machine here, the enormous machine here, is there built underground between Switzerland and France, in order to be a detector. And you can see the scale of this machine if you look at the man at the bottom center there. That's a normal sized person. And in order to process all the information that comes out of this detector, you need a lot of computers. So CERN had a strong computing group, and one of the programmers who worked there was Tim Berners-Lee, and he developed this concept of the web being inspired by other hypertext pioneers like Ted Nelson and such. But he was the one who put it all together, and he created three things that most of us probably use on an everyday basis. The first is the concept of URLs, that you can have a short string that gives you an address, something that you most often can remember and type in. Second, there's the concept of the HTTP protocol, which is, of course, what is used to transfer all the information we access and share with others these days. And the third is the HTML language. Tim took some inspiration there from SGML, which was a predecessor, but he simplified it enough so that anyone could write it and anyone could see and understand it. I remember the first evening late in the lab when I saw the HTML markup the first time, and was thinking, wow, can it be this simple? Is this all we need in order to do hypertext? And it was all we needed to do hypertext, and we could do incredible things with that small little HTML, that simple HTTP protocol. But there were a few things missing, of course, that came about later. This is another picture from CERN, by the way, and here is there's a lot of pipes and stuff at CERN that I don't really know what's going through there, but I do know what's in the corner there. That's a Sun workstation that was put there in order to showcase the web. Not all the students had computers at the time. This is, remember, this is 1993. So not everyone had portable computers. And even if they had, they weren't always networked, and they couldn't run a browser. They didn't have a browser. So we set up this computer in the corner there to show people what the web was. And they could sit there and click a little bit and play with the mouse. And we also made some slides some posters there to show what this was. And I think if you look at the slogan we had there, World Wide Web, you click and we do the rest. This was kind of the marketing campaign for the World Wide Web. And I think it's fair to conclude now that it wasn't the great slogans that made the web popular. The slogan was pretty, but it kind of worked, and it worked because it had a solid technical foundation. It was simple, it was easy to use, you could share it without being thrown in jail, you didn't have to pay anyone, you didn't have to pay the per minute fees that the phone companies charged, you didn't have to buy a CD, you just had to get on the internet somehow, and then you could download the rest and start from there. So in a way, you click and we do the rest. It's kind of right, but it's not great marketing. So at the same time, and now we're in 1994, the fall of 94, when I was at CERN, and CERN was of course a place that had all these computers and access to the internet. That wasn't obvious at the time, but I was very involved in discussions on the internet on what are we going to use this network for. Now that we have it, what kind of information should we publish? And one idea was to put out the laws of Norway on the web. And the laws were quite an easy target, if you will, because they're not copyrighted. In Norway, at least, and in many other countries, laws can be shared freely without any legal risks, or at least we thought so. So we put together this project to try to type in and scan in and make Norwegian laws available. And there was already a service that had done this, but they were commercial. They charged per minute fees. And if you were a lawyer, you could have a PC with a modem and you could pay a per minute fee and you would be able to search in the laws. And for a lawyer, that was a bargain because it would take them a lot of time, expensive time to look up things in books. But for a normal citizen who also was interested in, how does this society function really? What does the law say about this and that? You don't really want to pay for that. You've already paid through taxes. You paid the parliament to enact these laws. So we thought, laws should be freely available. So we made them available, and because I was in Switzerland and had access to the fast computers and a fast network, I was given the role of publishing this, and this made it to the news stories in Norway, and I thought I will read to you this little soundbite that was put into the press. An anarchistic group of 20 volunteers tries to replace Lovdata. That was the commercial service. The group is publishing the laws of Norway from a computer in Switzerland. From there, the laws are freely available via the world's largest computer network, the internet. And this is very cute in a way, because this was the first time the word internet was used in the Norwegian daily, the major daily Aftenposten. And I think it was good for us to get publicity through this, but calling us anarchistic, I'm not sure that was quite right, because we actually tried to, publish the laws of the country, which is not quite what anarchists normally do. But it was a good example, I thought, of using the internet for something that's meaningful. And I think Tim was with me in this, because I was doing this a little bit off hours and I didn't ask for permission to do this. But I remember one evening he came into the office. We were sharing an office there, and he looked over my shoulder and said, Håkon, what are you working on? And I was a little sheepish, perhaps, saying, well, I'm using the CERN computers to publish the laws of Norway. And he thought about that for a few seconds and said, that's a good use of the web. Do you need more disk space? I mean, we had disk quotas at the time, and disk space was expensive. So he said, if I needed more, he would provide it, which I thought was a good thing. And he's always also been very, very eager to see the technology used in the right way so that it's available for everyone to use. Technically, the web at that time was fairly basic. We had fantastic pages where you could click, like all the links were blue, like you can see in this screenshot. This is from the Mosaic browser. And by clicking on the blue stuff, you got to go onto another page, which was magical. And perhaps that other page was in another country, on another computer somewhere. And being able to jump from one machine to the other, which we do, of course, every day now, that was quite magical when we first saw that working. But all the pages they had a gray background and they had black text and they had blue links. And I thought, if this thing is going to escape the research community, then we need to do something better, because what they will ask for, the people who have, been using PageMaker and other page layout programs, they will ask for fonts and colors and white space and layout. And HTML didn't provide that. So some people suggesting adding this to HTML, basically to make HTML into a page description language. I thought that wasn't such a great idea. So I instead proposed another little language, kind of the cousin of HTML. It has a different syntax, different name, a different purpose, but it works very well together with HTML. And I called it CSS. And you all know that acronym by now, and you probably all recognize the CSS syntax as well. You can see a small sample here where we use a simple selector. We select all the H1 elements. If you know a little bit of HTML, you know that an H1 is the heading level 1. And we set a certain font size for that and a certain color. And if you have a basic understanding of computers, how to type, how to copy text, if you know what a pixel is, you need to know a little bit, but you don't need to know a whole lot in order to start modifying this and write this of your own. And the fantastic thing with the web, of course, is that you get the source code of the documents right away. You don't need to decompile source code. It's right there. And in most cases, so some people make it harder these days, and some pages are very complex, sometimes on purpose to prevent people from copying. But in the basic form, you can copy and reuse. And yes, there is a copyright on style sheets as well as other information. But in general, you can copy things, sentences, and reuse them. And that's how the knowledge about how to create all this spread. So it's a simple little language. It's presentational, where HTML was about semantics. CSS is only about presentation. And I think we need both. We need to be able to make compelling pages. We need to have pages that look good, and we need to have pages that have semantics in them. So therefore, HTML and CSS work well together. So some of the first things we did was, you start out with some text, right? And then you apply a CSS property like font size. You set a font size and you change the font size of the text. And then you want to change the style. You want to have the slanted text. These are some of the things. The first generation of that specification, CSS specification, had these things, being able to set serifs, being able to set the background of an element. This, being able to set the color of that background. That was really, really hot in 1995, I can tell you. And borders as well. Wow, you could have a different border than the background color. Fantastic. It's not quite as impressive now, but I'm just showing you this to show where we came from. Text shadow was probably the first property that was beyond the very basic. By having text shadow, we can actually do some tricks that enable people to, instead of using Photoshop or some other image program, you could actually continue to use text and just set a property on it and create some quite advanced effects like we're seeing here with the text shadow. You can have an offset, and here you have a pinkish a shadow. Here you have sort of a spray paint like thing, but you can see from my selection here is that this is still text underneath, and we want to send text over the internet. We don't want to send images really, because images are hard to process. Images can't be indexed, they can't be searched, they take up a lot of space. So it's much better to continue to use HTML, I thought, for content, and then you just add a little bit of CSS, like a one-liner here, to do all these things that designers wanted to do. And so we added more things, and people started to see this happening, and they came running and said, I really, really want this and this and this feature. And one of the things they really, really wanted was the border radius. And I was skeptical because I thought border radius, isn't that really very 70s design? Aren't we really past that point now? Can you really, is this something we should use our precious time on? Well, it turns out a lot of people wanted to have borders, rounded borders in CSS, and a lot of people wanted to create products that had rounded borders, like this one is the Apple Watch, and Apple has been, using rounded edges to perfection. They even got a patent for having rounded corners on their tablets, which I think, going back to the society part, I think maybe patents aren't such a good idea for these kinds of areas. And as technology people, we should be aware of this, and we should resist this when we see things like this happening, when people are taking something quite obvious and patenting it. In any case, I had to give up my fight against border radius, and I've come to like it. It's actually quite useful just by changing one line. You see this? Okay, so here's a simple setting. Border radius 40 pixels. Then I change it to give it 2 numbers instead of 1. It's a very simple change. It's 10 characters on the keyboard, but it really changes the way our vision sees this image. It's just visual fluff. I don't think Google or anyone else would index this page differently, but for our eyes, it's very important to have these visual cues. And I think in order to make and continue to have the web being a compelling format, we need to have these kind of tools in our toolbox, so that we can, or I'm saying it's really the designers, the good designers, that can use this to perfection. I'm not one of them, but I like to play with small languages to create visual effects. And here's another one. This is a CSS in combination with SVG, another format that was developed early on in the W3C community. And by writing, 3 lines of code, one is HTML code to reference the SVG image, and the other one is the two other ones is for setting transition to 1 second, and then we write this line which says when you hover over the image, you should transform it. You should do something, and it should rotate minus 360 degrees. This is fairly readable. It's human readable code. So I think most of you will guess what happens when I hover over that image. We actually have a transformation. The state symbol of Norway, this happens to be, I'm actually breaking Norwegian laws by doing this, because the state symbol should always be straight. And here it's not straight for exactly 1 second. And if you were to modify this, if I ask you to, change the speed at which the symbol moved, or how much it moved, for example, spin the other way, I'm sure all of you would be able to know and do this in about 1 minute to improve the design. And that's been how CSS and HTML has progressed, by being so simple that anyone could copy it and start using it. Then it made progress. I also have to say just a few words about testing, which was very important. One thing is to write a specification. That's quite easy, but having people implement it, and having people implement it in the same way, is not so easy. That's much harder. So we did a lot of work on testing in the early days. This is how 3 different browsers showed rounded borders at an early stage, and they're very different, and none of them are right. So we had to put a lot of emphasis on writing test cases and making sure that we had a coherent understanding of all these specifications. And thankfully, there was a strong community that worked to help us on this. And this is the Web Standards Projects, they call themselves, the WASP. A group of web professionals who thought, my life will be easier if all the browsers show the page roughly the same way. And that was very, very helpful. And I was actually on both sides of the table here. I also wanted to be part of the testing, because even though I represented a browser, Opera, we had the biggest browser at the time was Microsoft. Microsoft Internet Explorer had around 90% of the users in 2005. So I wanted to make sure that Microsoft changed their behavior. And writing specifications, I had tried. That took them part of the way, but they didn't fix the bugs. They left a bunch of bugs because they thought, it doesn't matter. People will adapt to the bugs. They will accept our implementation as standard, and we don't have to do anything to change that. The others that had to change. And I said, no, Opera, we have it right. You actually have to change. So we developed this test page called ACID2, which has its own page in Wikipedia, of course, like most things in this world. And the ACID2 page looks like this when it's correctly rendered. It says hello world, and it has a smiley face. And our vision is so that it's easy to see that this is a page that's correct. Now, if you open this page in Internet Explorer in 2005, this is what you would see. This is IE6 showing that page. And as you can see, it's got a bunch of problems here, because behind every pixel of this yellow face, there's a difficult test. And if you don't get it right, you will fail. You will show it in different color, or the sizing will be different. So here you can kind of see that it is a face. You can see that there's two eyes, one there, and there's a mouth below, and there's something dribbling out of the mouth. Not quite sure what that is. But this was, a little bit embarrassing for Microsoft when these things happen. We thought the next version, IE7, they will have fixed it now that they've seen how bad it looks. So when IE7 came out, we ran to check the ACID test page, and this is what it looked like, and that's hardly an improvement. You can still see the eyes there, the black dots, and now it has a scroll bar on one of the eyes. Not so good. It has a red nose. The dripping from the mouth is perhaps even worse in this version. So, we were about to give up and saying maybe we won't be able to change Microsoft's behavior. But then something happened, and this was the community racing up saying, no. We don't want this to be the case. We want actually Microsoft to change. So they stood up in every conference, everywhere where you could ask a Microsoft representative a question, they would ask, when are you going to support ACID2? And I think at some stage, Microsoft just said, well, we're just going to have to fix it because we're getting too much flack for not doing this. So when IE8 came along, the magical thing happened, that they had actually changed their behavior, and ACID2 works. So I think it's a good example of how the community can do magic things when even, when big corporations want otherwise. The community on the web, on the internet is very strong to change things. I'll mention a few things about Opera as well that I think are interesting. Opera was pioneering the use of the web on many devices, not just PCs, which is where most people were in 2005. We wanted to make the web available on all sorts of devices, including phones, which was probably our biggest market, but we were also on a lot of TVs, and still are on a lot of TVs where you can browse. Of course, we were on the Nintendo Wii gaming platform. So we put the internet, we put a browser into a lot of people's pockets and a lot of people's homes. And one of the things that started happening when we introduced what we called Opera Mini. Opera Mini was a product where we couldn't run the full browser in the phone. It was a small Java based device, and we could only run a mini browser that would compress the traffic. We would basically the user would basically click on a URL on the phone, and the request would go to a computer in the basement of our office in Oslo. And when the request came through Opera, we would compress the page and send over a compressed version to the user. So one of the things that happened when this thing spread out was that we suddenly saw these articles in Chicago newspapers. Chicago had a very advanced system of buses, CTA, where they had GPS receivers on them, and they transmitted where they were. So you could see on a live map where all the buses in the city were. This is in 2009, so it's quite pioneering, actually. And some journalists had been given access to the user logs for these for this system, and from the logs they could see that most of the users were actually Norwegians, which they thought was kind of weird. So they wrote newspapers articles about it. Norway's #1. Thousands of Norwegians have visited the CTA website. And in this other one, Norwegians are either utterly fascinated with the comings and goings of the CTA buses, or there just aren't enough recreational activities in the land of fjords and Viking ships. Of course, as you already have guessed, that wasn't quite the case. What was actually happening was that people were standing in Chicago, freezing probably, waiting for the bus to come and wondering, when will it be here? And they picked up their phone where they had Opera Mini installed, and they went to the CTA website. But since this went through our servers in the basement in Oslo, that's where the processing took place. Then from the logs, it seemed as if these were all Norwegians. So the internet changes, time and place a little bit. You can't really be sure about time and place in the same way anymore, before and after the internet. Another example of that, a little more serious one, is the revolution in Egypt in 2011, when we saw suddenly a big rise in the use of Opera, because the government had actually, turned off the internet for general use, but they had forgotten to turn off the ability to use Opera on mobile phones. So people switched to their phones that were in their pockets, and we saw a fantastic rise because people wanted access to information that was outside the control of the government. So if you see on this diagram here that we have a steady use before the January 25, when the revolution starts, and then it explodes. It goes way high until the government realizes that okay, people are using Opera Mini here. We need to turn that off as well, and so they did. And that lasted for about 3 days, and we don't really know what happened there when they turn it on again. Maybe people, got very angry for not being able to use their phones, and maybe government understood that it's better to have them use it than not have them use it. I don't know, but what we're seeing here is that they turn the internet on again after 3 days, and then the usage of the web stabilized again, but it stabilized at a much higher level. So it seems that once people are addicted to this, then they will continue to use it, and they won't let go. They won't go back to the previous lives. Okay, here's a little more lighthearted story again. This is a picture from an expedition that I was part of. Some of you may have heard of the Kon-Tiki expedition in 1947. This was just after World War II, when Thor Heyerdahl tried to show that the Pacific Ocean, which is, a very, very large place, was settled by Indians from South America, so that they traveled westwards rather than coming from the east. Now that's a very disputed theory, and DNA analysis has shown that he's mostly wrong actually on this. But he set out on a balsa wood platform, a balsa wood a boat, and sailed from Lima to the Pacific, on a raft, and we wanted to do the same, to see if it's possible to go even further south, to go to Easter Island, because Easter Island, of course, is this magical island. It's the most remote community on this planet. And if you just drift, like Kon-Tiki did in 1947, you end up along equator. But if you're able to set sail, you can actually sail to Easter Island. That's what we wanted to show, that was possible. One of the reasons why I joined, and Opera joined as a sponsor, was to show that the web is available all over the world, including the remotest part of the Pacific, where a satellite-based communication, that this Iridium antenna was able to give us the connection that we needed. And here's me. We brought with us a bunch of stuff. It's a basic raft. We have limits. For example, power and such was in limits, but we were able to bring a lot of scientific devices in order to, for example, measure temperature. Satellites can measure temperatures from above, but they only can measure the surface temperature. They can't measure the temperature way down. So we sent this thing down more than 2,000 meters to measure, to see how the oceans are changing, how the temperatures are changing in the ocean. So that was fun. Opera was a sponsor of this thing. That's also why I was there, and we had T-shirts with us. And it wasn't, T-shirts. Yeah, T-shirts are good, but you need to have flags as well, I thought. And here I promoted this Opera product called Opera Max. But some people said, Håkon, that's false advertising. Really, you should really promote something else. So I started promoting Opera Mini, which is more true in a way, because we were using Opera Mini quite a bit there, because the bandwidth available from a raft through a satellite is very, very limited, and being able to do compression is essential. And I still think we have to keep that in mind, even as we develop new services where, we use video here today. We use a lot of bandwidth for this conference, and it's generally available. But we should also make sure that there are offers, there are technology available to reduce and compress and make sure that we can use the web from all over, really. Here I'm going to give you a small crash course in how to photograph a fish. This is way outside the topic, but it's something useful. There are basically two rules when you photograph a fish. And here we see David, who just caught a fish. He is following rule number 1, but he's not following rule number 2. And if this was interactive in the audience, I would have walked down the aisle and asked if anyone know what rule number 1 and rule number 2 is. But I think that's going to be hard today, so I'm just going to say it out loud. Rule number 1 when you photograph a fish is to hold it in front of you, like David is doing here, because then the fish looks bigger. And this is a big fish. It's a dorado. It's very, very, very good. It provided us with lunch and dinner. But David is not following rule number 2. And rule number 2 is don't show blood. It's hard to tell some people that this fish actually is going to die and be eaten. So you don't want to remind them of that by showing blood. So therefore, we had to wake up early in the morning. I was the photographer, so I came out with my camera. And then the other crew came and wash the fish. And here we have it now almost, and here is a fish washed of blood, and he is going to die. I had to tell you, we are going to eat him, but he looks quite strong and healthy there in the picture, and I think it's a good picture. So think of that next time you want to photograph a fish. Then we were able to reach Easter Island. I'm going to come back to small islands in just a minute or two. And I'm going to switch back to some of the problems that are facing us in the future. Well, actually, they're facing us right now. Terms and conditions. The terms and conditions we have to accept by using the internet thing is just horrendous. And very well-made documentaries have been made on this topic, but we still haven't been able to make much progress. One of the, let me see, yeah, here it is. One of the more interesting and funny stunts that was done here in Norway by the Consumer Protection Agency, where they said an average phone has about 25 apps installed. We're going to take the terms and conditions from these apps, and we're going to print them out, and then we're going to read them out loud. And they invited various people to come out and read them. And this took about 25 hours. It takes about an hour per app to just read the terms and condition. And you can see the stack of papers there. It's not quite as big as Wikipedia, but it's very big. And this is legal language. So we had a read out loud session for 24 hours where we were reading legal language, and that's before you start understanding it really. So this is a real problem, and I bring this up in the context of small islands because I think Norway has a resource which may be able to change some of this. So Norway uses the .no domain for Norway. Just like other countries have their own. US is special, so it uses COM and such. But you all know about these geographical domain names. Norway happens to own, the Norwegian government happens to own two other domains. One is .sj, and the other is .bv. So these are two-letter domains that have not been used yet. And Norway has this because we have these small islands. SJ is for Small Svalbard and Jan Mayen. They're up north in the Atlantic. BV is for the Bouvet Island. It's named after a Frenchman, but it's now under Norwegian protection, so to say. And we have this domain name. And there's no one living on the Bouvet Island. There's only penguins there. So they don't really need the internet just yet. And these domain names have been unused. We could potentially start using them. We could potentially write, just like there is a Svalbard treaty, which describes how the landmass can be used. We could do a digital Svalbard treaty where we say, information in these domains, like BV, we could say here there are new rules. We don't accept the terms and conditions of the past. We're going to change the table. We're going to turn the table. We're going to have terms and condition be maybe a comic strip, or maybe just a small table showing who owns the information, who can delete the information. There are some very simple things that you need to be said about the data, and the terms and the complex language of terms and conditions makes our lives much easier, and also it makes us lie. In order to live a life on the internet, you had to click on I have read and I have understood and I accept these terms and conditions. And I bet none of us don't none of us read this information like we promised to have done. We just click yes, 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 yes. So we live in a system where we're forced to make false statements in order to just be a normal citizen, which I think is morally wrong. So the idea here would be to use these domains to change that landscape. It's still an option. The Norwegian government owns them, hasn't started using them. So we'll see. We'll see what becomes possible. We could also add a few other things. This list was written about 10 years ago. So I said encryption should always be on. Now that has changed. We are using HTTPS almost exclusively these days. So things are getting better, but it's not getting better fast enough, I think. And we risk that this terms and condition language remains, which would be a problem. Okay, I'm nearing my time here. I'm just going to end talking about books, a few minutes about books. One of the greatest books ever issued was Das Wikipedia Lexikon in einem Band, a German book that came out. It's a big book, heavy, impressive, and it has the sort of best of Wikipedia articles in German in one book. So people had taken the information available from the German Wikipedia and sorted through, probably taken out the most important ones but put that on paper and printed it. And I think if we are going to have paper books in the future, we need to learn how to make them from the web, because I think the web HTML will be the master format of all human information, and we can't produce books manually in InDesign or some other program. We need to be able to use web formats for this. So what I'm working on right now is to make sure that CSS can be used for making books. And I've written one book that uses it. It's a book about CSS. And we made a point out of using CSS itself to do the formatting for this. And it's not the only one, though. Leah wrote another book about CSS, which also uses CSS and HTML as the formatting, as the underlying language. So it is possible to do. We need to change CSS in a few places, and we need to have a good formatter. Browsers aren't very good at this. I tried to make Opera do this for some time, but it's hard to do in a browser. The browser has the browser wants to do 60 frames per second gaming and such. That's more important than doing a beautiful statically laid out page. But there are tools like those listed here. I'm affiliated with Prince myself, Prince XML, the first one there. And I'm trying to make sure that we can do, and I'm going to skip a few slides here, trying to make sure that we can create beautiful page-based presentations where we have multiple columns, where we have page numbers, where we have images that span several columns. These are techniques that have been used in paper-based publishing for years and years, for centuries. Like textbooks in the university, you need to be able to do figures to put them at the bottom of the page or float to the top of the page. The concept of a page is not something that we have on the screen, but where we have an endless scroll bar. So doing things on paper is slightly more complicated, but we need to, I take it as my personal challenge to make sure that CSS can be used for these kinds of things. Because, and this is my end point here, my punchline here, how long will the web last? How long will the things that we write today, be it computer code or articles in Wikipedia, how long will they be readable? Well, I think they will be readable 500 years. That's my guess. It's not a random number. It's a very convenient number because I'm not going to be around in 500 years. So nobody can tell me I'm wrong. The other thing is that 500 years, if we look 500 years back, we come to this man, Johannes Gutenberg, the man who created the printing press in the West. And he did this roughly 500 years ago. And that that really changed how Western societies worked. You talk about, the society before and after the book, because the books changed, the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Industrial Revolution. None of these huge movements would have been possible if we didn't have access to information. And he did it by way of paper, printing paper, which was way cheaper than handwritten paper. And now, of course, we have the web, which is doing another revolution, which is probably even bigger, because while the printing press mostly remained a feature in the West, the web is all over. Even in the Pacific, as I've shown some pictures of. So my guess is that this is going to be really a worldwide thing, and it's going to last for a long, long time. So we better take good care of it. And thank you to all of you who are volunteering to do the software and the content for use with the MediaWiki and Wikipedia. Thank you.
Håkon, you have a few questions in the Backstage comments there if you want to read through any. And
yeah, I see a SAS question there. That's something that people often bring up. What do I think of that? People have built other syntaxes on top of CSS. I think that's a good thing. We wish we could have done some of these things ourselves earlier. We had to keep CSS very minimal from the beginning because we wanted to have people implement them. So we had to take away things that wasn't very, very necessary. And I think some of the things that have been added later, the syntaxes that have been added later, have done a good job of doing the things that we perhaps wanted to do, but couldn't because we had to remain simple. So I think using those syntaxes, that's fine. You have my blessing. Are you ever surprised? That's another question. Are you ever surprised at what can be done with CSS? Yes, I'm very surprised. The CSS arts and crafts movements, where you kind of see, Mona Lisa painting done in CSS, or some other weird, very stylized, very graphical, very, intensive work of art being done with a few div tags and CSS. I'm surprised of that. We didn't quite think of it. We thought of this as a document world. We came kind of from that world of scientific papers and newspaper articles maybe, and lexicon dictionaries and such. We weren't really thinking of games and the 60 frames per second world. So that's kind of a, I wouldn't say surprise, but it's a development that I didn't do, CSS in order to do game renditions, but that's being used for now, and that's perfectly fine. I think we don't really want to make more languages now. We should be very careful adding more languages. The chances are that the next language will be a proprietary one owned by somebody, and that's not a good thing. We want these things to be common for all of us to use. And then I read a question, being called anarchists at the time, especially for doing something that now seems very straightforward, publishing laws for everyone to view, seems comical. Yeah, that's right. I hope some of you laughed. It's hard to, it's hard to register that roaring laughter online, but I'm glad to see that somebody sees it as comical. Any thoughts about the future of public access of information that now seem less clear, but will probably be obvious later? Well, I do think it's a good test to ask yourself, are the legal documents that I need to understand the society, are they freely available in my country? One thing is the laws, and they are generally in the countries I travel to, they're generally available, but sometimes there's still restrictions on how you can reuse them. For example, some say you can't publish an older version of the law. You have to only publish the most recent version. And you can't republish, you can't save the old versions and publish them yourself. So there are some gray areas here. It's not quite obvious that the legal community, the lawyers and such, they seem like they want to retain control of some of this. And what I'm doing, the project now where I'm using MediaWiki is to publish court decisions where we have, for example, Supreme Court rulings, to try to liberate them, and the archive, not just the ones that are coming out now, because they are generally published, but the archive from 100 years back, those are often very important cases that have created precedents. So we want all those to be available. If I could encourage any of you to be activists here, I think it's important, no matter where you live, you will find that there are companies that want to make money of this. I could name some of them in the US as well, but I don't think that's the point. I think the point is that we want to make sure the central verdicts and central laws, central rules for society must be available for everyone to read for free on the web. Okay, going up here, let's see. Do you see more centralization or more decentralization in the future of the internet? That's a very good question. Tim Berners-Lee, he was quoted recently as saying, you know, what I'm doing now, my next project is to fight the silos. He didn't name the companies behind those silos. So I think we can all imagine what logo would be painted on those silos. But we're certainly seeing some very big silos going up where they store a lot of information, a lot of personal information, and they get a lot of control. They can stop you from using your free speech, because even if you can publish it on your own website, you won't be able to reach anyone else. They can record your movements, of course, and save them. There are activists in the, you know, in EU, for example. I'm not sure about this, you know, all these cookie warnings that we get, at least in this part of the world. I'm sure you see them as well. I'm not sure that's really a great example of how laws can be used to fight for personal privacy. I think they should actually do some other things, but it is important that we have politicians that are thinking of these things, and therefore, you know, I'm also a member of the Pirate Party in Norway, which we started in order to get some of these things on the agenda, and certainly the digital agenda has been more active in mainstream politics as well. So I think in a way we are winning some battles. We're not winning all of them, and maybe the centralization things is one where we are actually losing. I was more optimistic 5 years ago, I must say. I mean, you could still have your own web page and run it on your own servers, like I do, but it's getting, you know, harder to make that be a significant step. So maybe we should look to Tim and see the next project he's doing. Like he said, he wants to fight the silos, and I think that's an important fight. There's a question about what are some good strategies for promoting new technologies, especially when it requires cultural changes by users. Wow, that's a complex question. I think in a way it's easier to answer, you know, how can we promote new technologies when it just requires distribution of new technologies? Like, just an example of the latter in CSS, that, you know, you can use JavaScript to fill in the missing links, kind of. If you can do 98% of your styling in CSS, maybe there's 2% that you can't really do in CSS because they haven't implemented that property yet, or you're doing something special. So you use JavaScript instead, which is okay. I mean, JavaScript and CSS have become good friends. I like to do things in CSS because I think CSS is simpler. I don't really want to deal with the programming language unless I have to. So building things on top of CSS is possible, but that's a technical thing. When it requires cultural changes by users, I think that's very hard. And I think you also should ask yourself, do you really need to change the cultural? Well, you know, yeah, of course, there's a lot of cultural changes that we can see being positive. So I can't say, I don't want to stop people from trying to change it. At the same time, I think we should be a little careful. I think that the web has changed our societies a whole lot over the last 20 years. It's just incredible what we've been able to do. And I don't think really we should encourage people to use screens more. For example, I think we're using them enough now. So let me add a personal example of what I'm doing. This is not to answer the question, but I'm actually, just to fight my own sort of addiction to screens, I bought myself a small farm where I'm growing apples. I think it's very healthy to be outside. I think it's healthy to see apple trees in bloom. And I also have a pipe organ workshop where we actually produce traditional pipe organs made from wood, leather, and metal that are put in concert houses and churches. They're the most analog machines you can think of, but you know, they don't require computers or screens. They've been working since the days of Gutenberg. So yeah, I don't know. That was not an answer to that question, but it's impossible to answer that question. Yeah.
That was for the questions. Yeah, thank you very much. That was a fantastic view into some of the World Wide Web's history and future, and we really appreciate your insight. So thanks for joining us, and thanks for the talk.
Thank you, and thanks again for inviting me.
Thank you.